Landlord is jealous of my income, raises my rent $500. I screw him years later for $20,000. Landlord is jealous of my income, raises my rent 50%. I screw him years later for $20,000. In the late 90s, my wife and I were just married, just getting started, and we decided to dink it for a few years to save up for a down payment on a house. The dot-com bubble was still rising, and I was a newly minted software developer. I had an entry-level job for a while, and then got recruited to a new city and a new job that paid 3x what I was making before. It was an offer too good to pass up. I ran the numbers, and it was a no-brainer. By living frugally and saving my entire salary, living off just our income, we would easily have enough in a year to put 20% down on a new house. We rented an apartment in the new city that was listed for $950 a month. The landlord was a real estate agent who owned a 2-bedroom condo as an investment property. Let's call him Hank Wazowski. Hank was a thin, gray, no-nonsense guy. He was pleasant enough, but perfunctory, dry, and had no sense of humor. He made a point of explaining that under no circumstances was he responsible for maintaining the garbage disposal, and that it was not included in the rental agreement, and he would not be responsible for fixing it were it to break. He seemed slightly amused by us, a clueless, young, newlywed couple, but I could tell he wanted to rent to us because we were very obviously a safe choice as renters. We filled out the rental agreement and the credit check, and this is where my troubles began. Hank looked hard at the credit application where I listed my job title, software developer, and my income, $75,000. For a 23-year-old in his second year out of college, in the late 1990s, this is a small fortune. Throw in my wife's salary, and we were over 6 figures in income, renting an apartment far beneath our means. Like I said, dink is the way to go when starting out. I can't believe how much money you make. Hank must have said half a dozen times, muttering under his breath. I explained we were saving to buy a house and that we were only going to stay in the apartment a year. We might stay a few months after the term is over. Would month-to-month be okay after a year? Hank assured us that would be fine. We saw Hank only once during the year, and he again mentioned my salary and how he couldn't believe that's what software developers were making. It was awkward, and I gave a vague reply. Anyway, a year later we had found a house to buy, signed all the papers, and were making plans to move. The new house wasn't going to be ready until 2 months after our rental lease was up, so I called Hank to ask if we could, as discussed, simply extend the lease by 2 months before moving out. Hank assured me on the phone it would be no problem and he would send over an extension for us to sign. The extension arrived in the mail, and it included a month-to-month clause and a $500 increase in the rent. I flipped out and called him. Hank, why are you increasing the rent over 50%? That's too much. That's more than my new mortgage is going to be. He was super condescending to me. Rocky Moose, it's what the apartment goes for now. I would be losing money by renting it for less. I tried to reason with him, but it was very clear he knew we could afford the $500, had no choice in the matter, and he was going to screw us over as best he could. He got angry with me for arguing my point, and I'll never forget his parting words. You don't have to like it, Rocky Moose, you just have to pay it. My wife and I tried to figure out a way to move out early by putting our furniture in storage for a couple of months and crashing with friends, but it just wasn't going to work out. I swallowed my pride and wrote out the check for $1,450 for the extra month. A month later, I wrote a similar check, and then we moved out. I made sure the apartment was spotless before moving, but still, Hank withheld $300 from our security deposit for things that were just a way for him to squeeze a few more dollars from the kids who made too much money. $100 for cleaning? Sure, but $300 was obscene. In my mind, he had screwed me over for $1,200, and there was nothing I could do about it. What made it even more infuriating is that I saw the ad Hank put in the paper after we moved out, and he listed the apartment for rent at only $150 more than we had been paying originally, not the grossly inflated $500 increase. And it didn't rent. A month later, I saw the same ad, and he had lowered the price to $75 more than we had been paying, and I assume it got rented since the ad stopped appearing. Fast forward about 5 years. Life is good. The house is good. We have a baby. And even though the dot-com bubble has burst, I'm still employed. One day, out of the blue, I overhear one of my coworkers, Phil, a senior developer, talking to the guy working the reception desk. Hey, Mike, I'm expecting someone to drop off some paperwork for me. If a Hank Wazowski asks for me, tell him I'll be right out. I freeze and get a taste of bile in my mouth, remembering how I had to write out that name on those checks all those years ago. There's no way it's the same guy, right? I walk over to Phil, who is still by the reception desk. Phil, I say, how do you know that name, Hank Wazowski? Phil explains that Hank is his real estate agent. I bought my condo through him several years ago. I'm selling my condo now so I can buy a house. So I'm going to ask him to be my agent again. Do you know him? I tell Phil that I used to rent an apartment from Hank and describe what he looks like. Phil confirms the description. It's the same guy. Wow, small world, right? And on cue, right then the front door to the office opens, and in walks Hank Wazowski. Está en disbelief. He's carrying a folder of papers and doesn't recognize me. Phil and Hank shake hands, and they talk for a few moments. I stand there silently, wondering what to do. Phil finally says, Hank, this is my friend Rocky Moose. I think you may have already met? Yes, hello, Hank. Good to see you again. My wife and I were your tenants a few years ago on Street. Remember, the software developer who rented for a year, saving to buy a house? Well, this is where I work. Here, with Phil. Hank's eyes indicate he now remembers me, and he's starting to put it all together. We shake hands, and he says yes, of course he remembers, and asks how we were doing. We're just fine. Thanks for asking. Phil says that you're his real estate agent. Small world, isn't it? Hank nods pleasantly. He still doesn't remember the details of our last conversation. I do some quick math in my head. This is the early/mid-2000s. The real estate market is very strong and easy money for any agent. The crash of 2008 is still a few years in the future. I start to think out loud. Selling the condo for around $150,000 to $200,000, and you're looking at houses in the $500,000 range. So that's $650,000 to $700,000 in total transactions. An agent getting 3% on the sale, and the purchase is getting around $20,000 for his trouble. That's a good commission for the agent, isn't it? Hank's eyes flash, and I can tell he remembers everything about me now. Phil is surprised at my passive-aggressive tone. I am enjoying the uncomfortable silence. Hank deflects my question, saying it's complicated, and tells Phil to send back the papers as soon as possible. He shakes hands with Phil, looks at me, nods, and goes to leave. It was really good to see you again, Hank, I call behind him. He exits the building. As the door is still shutting, I say a bit too loudly so that Hank can hear, Phil, don't sign anything just yet. I have a story to tell you. Phil looks at me and says, Rocky, what the hell was that all about? He looks pissed and confused at my behavior. I tell Phil the whole story, the rent, the $500 increase, the security deposit. You don't have to like it, you just have to pay it, everything. Phil, you can't use this guy to sell your condo and buy a house. I hate him. He's evil. I'll help you find another real estate agent. Just use anyone but Hank. So the great thing about Phil is that, well, he's a great guy. He says he's a little surprised at my story and has always known Hank as a straightforward guy. But I totally see him doing that to you, he admits. There's no way I could use him now. What a dick. Then Phil's eyes lit up a bit. What do you want me to say when I fire him? We came up with a plan, and I made sure there were some key phrases in Phil's repertoire. We planned it all out together in advance. My only regret is that I didn't get to see Hank's reaction in person a day later when Phil made the following phone call, while I stood behind him listening. Hi, Hank. It's Phil calling. Yeah, about that. I've decided to get some other quotes from other agents. I'm not going to sign up with you. No, you shouldn't give a discount. You'd be losing money if you did that. No, this is just a decision I've made. No, it has nothing to do with Rocky Moose. Well, you don't have to like it, Hank. You just have to accept it. Goodbye. And it was the greatest revenge I could have ever imagined. Through a chance meeting years later, Hank got screwed out of $20,000 in easy commissions. And the best part is Hank absolutely knew it had everything to do with Rocky Moose. Maintenance guy throws out 15 years of important knowledge. A guy I worked with knew he was going to get fired, so he threw out his notebook that had 15 years of notes on how to do his job. Management really wanted that book so they could get rid of him but keep his knowledge. They tried to unfire him until he could write it down again. He said no and left. A while ago, I worked at a baseball store called Walmart, or a general goods store that sounded like that. not long after the Great Recession of 2008, and management was trying to cut costs because of falling profit. One of the first things management did was fire 2 of the 3 full-time maintenance/cleaning guys. The one guy they kept, I'll call him MG for maintenance guy, was amazing at his job. Everything in the store ran well because of him and his willingness to go beyond what was required to help people. A genuinely nice guy. For 6 months, management tried to make having 1/3 of a maintenance staff work, and it failed miserably. MG could not do everything, and overtime management increasingly asked him to coordinate some part-timers that were supposed to do the cleaning and carts. He spent so much time coordinating that he had no time for maintenance. The night crew was also cut, so they couldn't pick up the slack. Then 2 things happened within the space of a week that told management how important he was to the store running well. First, some cleaning machines broke down. Turns out they have to be properly cleaned weekly. If left alone, they gum up real bad and parts were out quickly. A several $1,000 repair bill because he was told to prioritize coordinating part-timers over tinkering with machines. A few days later, the deli lady nearly quit after the blade on the deli slicer went flying off and could have cut her face badly. Turns out that the bolt that held it in place was loose, and MG had tightened it weekly for her. When he didn't have time to do that anymore, he told management it had to be replaced for safety, but management didn't do that because it cost money while telling people it was fixed. That could have been a lawsuit or criminal charges. They and the deli lady got lucky. So management sat down with him and asked him why things were going wrong. MG told them point blank he needed enough time for maintenance, and someone else had to coordinate the part-time cleaners and check up on them. Management called BS. They said maintenance should be easy and done quickly. MG got mad because that insulted his professionalism, and he pulled out his notebook from his back pocket. It turns out that over his 15 years, he had filled the book with charts, schedules, and diagrams of how to do his job and keep things running. There were over 100 things he checked weekly or monthly. There were a lot of machines he kept in running order. Some had certain things that were half broken and had to be wiggled in a certain way. To be honest, a lot of these things were minor or major safety hazards. But over the years, management was fine with not replacing multi-$1,000 machines if MG knew how to keep them working. As well, he did things that he should not have done, like calibrating machines for departments that should have done it themselves or contracted it out. But he was a nice guy, and he liked helping people. He told me that he spent about a half hour telling management about what he did, and he suspected that until then, nobody had ever known how much he did. Well, he may have said a few swear words and derogatory things while telling management why he needed time to do stuff. It was not a good moment for him, and he was pissed. At the end, he put his notebook back in his pocket and offered to take a week to write up everything he knew so that management would have written proof of why his job mattered in case a higher-up asked why they increased maintenance costs when corporate was demanding they cut costs. The multiple managers in the room looked at each other and asked him to leave so they could talk in private. He told me several years later, when I ran into him somewhere and had lunch with him, that he had a premonition as he walked out of the room. So he went to the back room and tossed his notebook in a garbage compactor. For good measure, he then went around the store and emptied all the garbage cans and tossed those bags, and so his notebook was properly buried. He was fine with it. All that information was in his head. After a few minutes, management called him back. They told him that they could not allow him to keep working there because of the level of insubordination he had shown. They said as soon as he surrendered his badge, box cutter, and notebook, he would be escorted out of the building by security. He handed over his badge and box cutter. They asked for the notebook. He said he threw it in the compactor. Their eyes went wide, and they asked why he threw it out. He said he thought he was going to write everything up nicely on the computer from memory, so he thought he was done with the notebook. At this point, management starts looking at each other worried because they had intended to take his book, fire him, and have a less subordinate part-timer do his job. Now they couldn't. One of the managers suggested that he be allowed to write up the info before being escorted out. The others agreed. He was given the chance to be unfired just long enough to give them the info. How kind. He laughed and walked out, head held high, and management followed him to his car to make sure he left. I don't have exact numbers, but I guesstimate the store had to spend at least $20,000 or $30,000 to replace stuff that MG had kept working beyond the equipment's lifespan, and the new guy they hired had a hell of a time figuring out how things worked. To be honest, in a few cases, MG had gone too far, like creating fire hazards by taping broken chargers together after rewiring them instead of tossing them. But management had never complained when he saved them money. There's also a lot of things that should have been done by the health and safety team or the departments, but they also never complained about having less work. I asked him if throwing out that notebook was illegal, but he said it was personal property to help him remember things. It was not a work-provided notebook. He was proud of what he did. His pride clearly showed in how he told the story. He said that nobody is allowed to question his professional judgment by implying he is lazy. I agree. My foster parents treated me like crap, so I obliterated their reputation in our small town. My parents were both killed in a hit-and-run car accident when I was 10. My dad was only 39 and my mom 35. Neither of them had relatives who could take me in. We live in a really small, church-going town where everyone knew one another. My dad had been the heir to a small fortune and so didn't really have to work. He didn't like the big city, so he and my mom decided to move to a small town where he could have an antique store. My mom was into collecting antiques. I would have had to go the orphanage route when they died, but this couple from the church, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. Banks, made this big to-do in church about how a little girl needs a loving home, and God has given us this joyous task of bringing her up in our home and hearts. It's been a long time, and I don't remember if those were Mrs. Banks' exact words, but there was something cringeworthy like that. The Banks had their own daughter, Kitty, who was a year older than me. That should have meant we would be super good friends, but Kitty had her own thing going and practically ignored me. She was a holier-than-thou type. The Banks received a stipend from the state to take care of me, but they also received checks every month from my dad's estate, which was supposed to take care of me until I was 18. When I did turn 18, I would receive full control of my inheritance. The Banks weren't exactly cruel to me, but in private, it was clear they were just using me to build up their reputation in town. In front of other people, they'd fawn over me in a sick, cotton candy fashion that made me uncomfortable. They'd also make Kitty be nice to me in public, which she resented. The Banks would also put on a big show whenever social workers came to check up on me. They'd coach me before the lady would come and tell me to praise how godly and wonderful they were. After the social worker left, they'd go right back to ignoring me and spending my dad's money on crap on the internet or on trips. It was clear to me, even as a tween and teen, that the Banks were only using some of my endowment, both from the state and from my trust, to take care of me. The rest, they spent on themselves. As I grew older, I could see that my foster parents would pretend as though they had great business acumen, and that's why they had more money and could buy a new Volvo. Where I'm from, a new Volvo is an event, and take a trip to New York and buy fancy clothes for Kitty. When I was 17, I noticed that my foster parents were stockpiling away my trust fund money to pay for Kitty's tuition to college. Throughout this time, the Banks would never outright say so, but would heavily imply that I owed them, and that once I got control of my inheritance, that I should be godly and generous and give them some material compensation for all the work they did to raise me. I think they already got lots of material, especially since Mrs. Banks practically stole all of my mom's antiques from her store and kept them for herself, gave them to Kitty, or to her other relatives. One thing my mom never kept at her store was an extremely expensive, Baroque-era, fine china set, absolutely complete and worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a replica, but the real deal. So real, Napoleon Bonaparte himself might well have eaten a steak off those plates. Probably not, but you get the point. It was my china set, of course, but Mrs. Banks thought I was an idiot and didn't know that. She would always talk about how this china set will go to Kitty on her wedding day. Mrs. Banks assumed that since I always dressed like a tomboy, didn't care about all my mom's antiques that Mrs. Banks stole or gave away, that I just didn't care about the china set. When I was a kid, my mom told me that things were things and not to obsess over them. So, having the frou-frou china set for myself wasn't an issue. What was an issue was Mrs. Banks acting like it was hers to give away. Wrong, lady. So, once Kitty went off to college thanks to MY biological mom and dad's money, I had to make my own plans. I had always done well in school and had actually gotten a partial scholarship to attend school out of state. The rest, I could easily pay for with my inheritance, which I would very soon have control of. Per usual, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were haranguing me about how I owed them compensation, and since I was going to be rich soon, I ought to share the wealth. I figured that over the past 7 years, they probably stole or misappropriated more than $200,000 of my parents' money, to say nothing of the state money they misused. I think they more than shared the wealth. I never promised anything. I just smiled and kept a tally of every single bank statement that my trust issued over the years. The Banks family never shared them with me, of course, but when I asked the actual bank for a rundown, they were more than happy to oblige. I also wrote down every single major purchase my foster parents clearly made over the past 7 years with money that was clearly beyond their means as a housewife and an insurance salesman. Things such as a $40,000 car for cash, a used $20,000 car for cash that they gave to Kitty, trips to Hawaii, New York, cash gifts to the church that made them look super generous at my deceased parents' expense. I kept it all in a nice 3-ring binder. I already arranged my travel to my new campus. I didn't have much stuff at the Banks' house anyway, and had zero intention of coming back, at least to their home. The Banks knew I was leaving but didn't bother seeing me off because they assumed I'd come back to give them their due. I waited for our church's yearly antique sale extravaganza, set to begin in 3 days. Per usual, the Banks donated all sorts of random stuff, many of it knickknacks that used to belong to my mom and technically belonged to me. They weren't shy about giving away my stuff and taking credit for it. While Mr. and Mrs. Banks were on one of their shopping sprees with my parents' money and away from their house, I boxed up the china set and brought it to church. I told the rummage sale committee that Mrs. Banks wanted to donate the priceless antiques for sale, all benefits to go to the church. This donation is made in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Banks. I was being fair. If Mrs. Banks was really so godly, she would be delighted that such a wonderful donation be made in her name. Sadly, I knew she'd go the other way, because she was faker than porn star implants. The ladies were flabbergasted, especially when I told them the appraisal of the set's value. I also told them that if they needed proof of ownership and right to sell, to contact the number of a certain attorney in New York. They thanked me profusely and praised the Lord Jesus for Mrs. Banks' generosity. This would be the most expensive item in their sales history. Everyone knew no one could afford to buy the set outright, but everyone would love to buy the pieces piecemeal. Like I got a cup and saucer, or I got one of the chargers, I got an egg cup. The Banks were supposed to work the sale the second day, and I wasn't there. What I did here was that my foster mom went ballistic when she saw her china set for sale, and that it was a huge hit, and ladies from all over the county had bought pieces of it, and it raised so much money for the church. My foster mom threw a tantrum and said that I had stolen the set from her house. The ladies at the church explained that I had made the donation in her name, and she was getting credit for the donation to the church. My foster mom was practically yanking her hair out, according to what I heard later. She was trying to track down who had bought pieces and trying to get them back. Of course, she was unsuccessful. What she was successful in was looking like a grade A douchebag. The entire church thought she was selfish and materialistic and acting very ungodly, especially the way she cursed her foster daughter. A week later, my foster parents received a package by registered mail from me and my attorney. It contained my binder where I showed my bank statements and also a list of all their spending extravagances. It also contained a warning from my attorney that should they ever try to contact me again for money, that they will receive a bill and a court date. That was that. 10 years later, I work as a third-grade teacher. I'm married to an accountant, and we have a 3-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. Kitty ended up working through college, and as we've gotten older, we've reconnected. She apologized for the way she acted when we were kids. We're friends now, and see each other multiple times a year, often just for lunch. She's an elementary school teacher, too, and married to an engineer. She has a 4-year-old daughter. Both of our older kids play together when our families meet. We both have our own wedding china. She's gone to a lot of therapy due to her toxic parents, she tells me. As for her parents, they still live in their small town because they're too broke to move. Their reputation is of being that couple who drove both their children away and stole money from that poor little girl whose parents died, and they try to steal money from Jesus when they whined about getting their Baroque china back. I hope your Volvo was worth it, a-holes. HOA wants me to join, so I do. Just not how they expected. So this story is about a property I own but rent out. This may sound strange, but I don't think I could afford to live there these days. It's become somewhat exclusive. I guess this could also go in pro-revenge. I've used dollars here because it's what most people reading this will relate to. This doesn't take place in the US, and I've given an approximate dollar value for local currency. To answer the most commonly asked question, this is in South Africa. This is going to be very long. 1,000,000 years ago, my property was part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm was broken up, but before there was any development near it. The piece of land I got was near the back entrance that joined into a dirt road that ran past. The more expensive plots were near the tarred road in the front. I originally bought a large chunk of the land intending to do some farming, but that never happened. About 20 years ago, some of the owners got organized, we'll call them the Organized Owners, OO, and had the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to put in tarred roads, water, and electricity if a certain percentage of the properties were developed. A construction company, linked to the OO, went around contacting the owners who had land but no buildings, offering to build houses for us at a very reasonable price, contingent on them getting a certain minimum amount of people signing up. While this was happening, one of the OO approached me and offered to buy half of my property. I agreed, and the money I got for the sale, which was about 4 times what I'd paid for the entire chunk of land 10 years prior, combined with a small loan from the bank, gave me what I needed to pay for a house to be built, and it was a fairly large and nice house too. I stayed in the house for a few years, and my mom moved in with me. I had decided to subdivide the property again and build her a house next to mine, but unfortunately, an undiagnosed tumor took her before the house could even be started. Well, it was diagnosed, but too late to do anything. Soon after she died, we moved out of the house and started renting it out. About a few weeks before we moved out, the OO I'd sold the land to started talking about starting an HOA. I wasn't interested and left soon after. About 2 years later, the neighbor OO contacted me. There were 2 roads entering the area these days. The original tarred road that was near where the farmhouse had been and was entered from a fairly busy main road, and my dirt road back entrance, which was now a tarred entrance from a wide but not very busy municipal road. The HOA was trying to get the old farm road blocked off to improve security and decrease through traffic, and wanted the road next to my property to be the main and only entrance to the HOA community. And they were pressuring me to join. I said no, and I was adamant. And eventually they accepted that, but told me they wanted to have a sign near the road welcoming people to the neighborhood. And the only practical place to put it was on the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a little guard hut and have a security guard permanently monitoring who went in and came out, and they wanted to build a shed on my property. We came to an agreement whereby they would mow the lawn and pay the equivalent of about $35 per month in exchange for the land they needed. I was very happy with this arrangement, since the property was fairly large, and it didn't really cost them anything since they already had a full-time gardening service servicing the HOA. This all happened over a decade ago. They eventually got the other main road blocked off, and the HOA is paying for Rent-A-Cop to be permanently stationed close to my property, as well as mowing my lawn and paying me enough money for takeaways for the family each month. I'm occasionally contacted by members of the HOA to get me to sign up, but I'm really not interested. My property has been rented to the same tenant for all these years, and everything there is going well for me. Until about 3 years ago, when someone scared the crap out of my tenant's young daughter by making strange noises and shooting a gun close to her bedroom window 3 or 4 times over about a month. This scared my tenant, and I guessed it scared the HOA because my tenant contacted me with a proposal. I joined the HOA, and they give me exclusions from the HOA rules, including exclusions from paying the monthly fees, and in addition, they will build a wall around the entire HOA neighborhood, including electric fencing and security cameras. They told me they had wanted to do this for a while, but were unwilling to build the wall on property that was not in the HOA. I couldn't see the downside, so I agreed. It took a little over a year to build the wall and get everything completed, which is quite fast. And then a month to the day after everything was done, my tenant got an HOA warning about his dog barking. He told the HOA that while the property was in the HOA, it was exempt from the rules. The HOA told him that they had canceled the exemptions and that he had 30 days to comply. He contacted me, and I opened some mail I'd gotten from the HOA. I'd ignored it since I was supposed to be exempt from the rules and fees. Man, did I get a surprise. They had retroactively canceled the exemptions and were claiming 1. That I pay late fees going back over a year. 2. That the easement agreement had been canceled and that they were retroactively canceling it a year back because the HOA contract allowed them to use small and used portions of HOA members' land for the common good for free. 3. That I refund them the money they had paid for the easement over that period. 4. That I owed them money for the garden service mowing the large lawn. And 5. That I would be fined for each infraction my tenant failed to remedy. This started an expensive process involving lawyers and the court system that ended with a judge telling me that what the HOA had done was mostly legal. They had the right to revoke the exemptions, but that they had to give me 30 days notice. As I was walking to my car, the neighbor OO, the one who bought half my land so many years ago, told me that I was stupid to have refused to join when the HOA started, as I could have been a founding member, whatever that means, and that next time I should be sure to understand the documents I signed before signing them. Neighbor OO was right. I should have read the contract better. Also, I was interested in what it meant to be a founding member. Spoiler. Nothing, and so when I got home, I grabbed the HOA contract I'd signed, as well as all the other documentation they had provided me with, and started reading. I was determined to break every rule I could find a loophole to break. I didn't get past the first page. While the street address of the property is used to identify it for all practical purposes in the city records, it has a unique property number that has to be used on legal records. When my mom moved in, I'd subdivided the remaining property but hadn't yet started building on it. And when I gave the HOA the easement all those years ago, it had been on the property I'd sliced off from my mom. And when the HOA set up the contract, they had simply used the property number from the easement. The next afternoon, the neighbor OO delivered and had me sign for 2 documents, one telling me that my exemptions would expire in 30 days and one letting me know that the easement would no longer be required after 30 days. I think he was being a bit malicious here because I lived about an hour away from the property and he drove out himself. Exactly 30 days to the hour after the HOA had given me the 30 days notice, I knocked on the neighbor OO's door. Did I mention he was the president of the HOA? And had him sign for 2 documents. The first was that I planned to build a house on my HOA property, which confused him. And the second was notice that they had 30 days to remove from the property the guard shed, the parts of the electric boom that were on my property, as well as the sign. He tried to engage me, but I ignored him, climbed into my car, and drove off. Early the next morning, I got a call from the HOA lawyer, who explained to me that their junk would be staying on my property since it was in an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there and that the land would not be in use anymore. I could hear the smirk as he told me that building a second house to be spiteful would not be accepted by the courts. I sure hope he could hear the smirk in my voice when I told him that the property in question did not have a house and was, in fact, barely large enough for a house to be built and would not be large enough for any extraneous buildings. I then told him to go look up the property in question and call me back. It took them just under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer told me that the terms of the easement meant that I could not cancel without their permission. So I emailed them a photo of the document they sent to me canceling the easement. That afternoon, neighbor OO invited me to lunch, his treat, to discuss the problem. I said no thanks. He extended the offer again 2 days later, and again I said no thanks. Others of the original OO contacted me to try to talk. Some sounded aggressive, some sounded sympathetic. I said no thanks to each of them. Eventually, the lawyer phoned and asked if we could come to some sort of arrangement. I asked what he had in mind, and he told me that he was prepared to discuss exclusions in exchange for access to my property. So I said, no thanks, and please don't call me again. About 9 days before their 30 days was up, I got a call from a different lawyer. He said he wanted to negotiate a surrender, his words, not mine. I agreed to meet him at his office the next day. I'd already had documents drawn up, and the meeting was as simple as me giving him the documents and him reading them over. My new easement offer. 1. Included everything offered by the old easement offer. 2. I changed the line mow the lawn to get the property to HOA standards and keep it there, since it was now in the HOA. 3. Would cost them about $500 per month instead of around $35. This amount would increase with inflation. The previous contract didn't include that bit. For when canceled for whatever reason, the HOA would have to pay me a cancellation fee of around $7,500. 5. The contract automatically terminated 30 days after 1. Any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property. 2. Any complaints were levied by the HOA against the property. 3. Any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the HOA. 6. That the lawyer who had offered to negotiate surrender would be allowed to mediate any disputes between us at HOA's expense, and that. 7. The HOA would pay all my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. I deliberately left some insane things in there so that I could appear to concede some points or be negotiated down when the HOA got indignant about the points I actually cared about. The lawyer didn't look happy. He said that my proposal sounded unfair, but that he'd have the HOA president look at them. I reminded him that in 8 days, I'd be setting a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. That evening, I got an irate call from the HOA president. He told me he was never going to sign the new contract. I said, okay. He then told me I was charging too much per month and that it should be at the same rate as the previous contract. I pointed out that when I signed the previous contract, the area was under development and there was at least one other road leading in and out, but that now there was only mine. And besides, mine was now developed with everything they needed. He told me that I was forcing them to sign a document they didn't want to sign. I told him that he was free to not sign it. He whined about everything he could think of and then eventually told me I'd be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, Surrender Lawyer called to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I got there that afternoon, I learned that Surrender Lawyer was not a lawyer, but a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He laughed when I told him I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing was changed, and mumbled something that sounded like, "I'm sure you would." I read the contract. Nothing had been changed. Not a single thing. And the HOA president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as witness. I looked at him and said, "Why did he sign this?" "It was stupid to sign it." And the paralegal looked at me and said, I started telling him that signing it would be a bad decision, but he told me I wasn't being paid to think or give legal advice and to shut up. So I shut up. I said, "Do you understand what he signed here?" He looks at me and nods. He said, "I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers look at it before giving it to you. And he told me that we had already billed enough for this and that he'd sign it and sue me after their easement was safe." This happened about 1.5 years ago. It took 6 months for the HOA to find out how screwed they were. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained to them that there was no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would get is the easement contract voided, and they did not think that the court would side with them. The lawyers were adamant about one thing. The HOA could not live with the HOA pays my legal fees if legal action was taken against me, since it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the HOA. As worded, the HOA would be forced to pay for my legal fees if anyone took legal action against me. They argued that the courts would probably not enforce that, since the context of the agreement was to do with the HOA, and I told them I was prepared to find out since the HOA would definitely be the ones taking action against me if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract that said that the neighbor HOA president would personally pay all my legal fees unless he held no position at all in the HOA, and that the HOA would pay all legal fees if the HOA took legal action against me. He resigned from the HOA at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. He didn't look pleased. It came out during the mediation. You cannot imagine how happy the lawyers were that their paralegal was mediating, that without the ability to control access to the HOA neighborhood through the security boom, partially on my property, the HOA had become a gated community a number of years back. The HOA would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned, should have been obvious to me, that all the security cameras were wired and all terminate in the guardhouse/guard shed. So basically, it was my way or the end of the HOA. That first mediation was really quite funny. My paralegal looked more than a little glum as we assembled, and he called everyone to order. I suspected that he had been told to work against me, so I took the initiative. I reminded everyone there that I had agreed to let the paralegal mediate, but that I had agreed to no arbitration at all. If I didn't feel like the proceedings were fair, I'd leave and they could go ahead and sue. Paralegal brightened up, and things actually went quite well. I'm writing this after getting home from the latest mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighborhood dogs. As in, I made it myself. I dug a hole, packed it with stone, and added a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and, if I say so myself, it looked terrible. The HOA called for a mediation meeting, what they do now, instead of taking official action. I've declined their mediation requests in the past, in which they told me, as nicely as they could, that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the HOA. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed to give to me at the next meeting. The list was extensive. It basically required the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. I asked them if there was any way to reduce costs on the work they needed to get it up to HOA standards, and they assured me there is not. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to get the property to HOA standards, which I'd highlighted, and handed it to them with a list. I told them the HOA usually preferred if these things were dealt with within 30 days. They started arguing until the mediator reminded them that they could not force me to comply without causing the easement to end. I should mention that their lawyers usually no longer attend these things. They said they would get it done. I also learned a lot about neighbor OO today. 1. I found out that neighbor OO sold his property about 3 months back and is apparently leaving the country for Australia. 2. I found out that the HOA had successfully sued him for a crapload of money they had lost to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. 3. I also learned that he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure if I will screw with the HOA anymore. I already think I'm so close to breaking them, the only thing stopping them from canceling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. I guess a lot depends on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. Also, I do like the monthly payments though, so I'm motivated to play nice. Neighbor O was right though, in the end. You really shouldn't sign documents unless you understand what you are signing.